Hello and welcome to Pleasure Reading. I'm your host, Amelia Ruby, and this is a podcast about the pleasure of reading, where I share curated reading lists, author rankings, chats with my bookish friends, and more. If you too take pleasure in reading, I hope that you will subscribe and share this show with a friend. Cheers to your next best book. Hello, and welcome to Pleasure Reading. I'm your host, Amelia Ruby, and on this show, I talk about the pleasure of reading as I share curated book lists, TBR wrap-ups, conversations with my bookish friends, and today, an episode about my reading plans for the year, or some shifts I've decided to make in how I approach reading in 2026. Before I do that, Happy New Year, friends. How is January treating you? How are you feeling about your reading this year? Last year, I made a lot of end-of-year content at the end of 2024, and then a lot of start-of-the-year content at the beginning of 2025. And I even made a very ambitious 5-star TBR where I was going to read 25 books that I thought might be a 5-star read for me in 2025. And I proceeded to read, I think, literally one of them, which, is totally fine. But I did sit with and say, okay, in 2026, I am not going to make any ambitious reading plans. There is no 5-star TBR this year. There is no list of 26 books that I'm reading on a particular theme or for a particular reason. I am just going to continue my mood reading. I'm going to continue reading for pleasure. I'm going to continue reading for education. And I'm going to keep sharing about what I'm reading, but maybe with a little less project-based focus on it. I think that is, of course, one of the things that happens when you start a podcast about your reading is then I was like, oh, well, I'll read things on this theme and I'll have content about this thing and I'll do all of this because now I get to talk about books all the time. And, that felt good in the beginning. But in 2026, I'm tired, y'all. I don't know about you, but I just want to lower the bar on many of the things I'm doing, especially the things I'm doing for pleasure, like this pleasure reading podcast. So as I arrive here today, please know that I'm not coming with any grand reading plans. I just want to talk to you a little bit about what I'm thinking for my year ahead in books. And I also want to share a few book recs or talk you through how I'm picking books I want to read and prioritizing things this year. So that will all be in this tiny episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. And let's get to it, shall we? So in 2026, I have made one very normal, mundane decision and one kind of different decision about how I'll approach my reading. The mundane decision is that I have once again set a reading goal, and it is once again 100 books. That has been my reading goal for the past 3 years at least, I think. I kind of got back into reading, I believe in 2022. That's when I created an account on Literal. And looking back, that year I read 65 books. I was just fitting books in when I had time and when it felt like fun, when it was pleasurable. The next year, I decided to read a little more. I kept tracking my reading. I read 85 books in 2023. And then in 2024, I was like, okay, I want to read a lot more. So I set a goal to read 100 books, and I did. I actually exceeded that goal by quite a bit. In 2024, I read 153 books, which is wild. And it was too much. So you may remember at the end of 2024, when I was just starting this podcast, I was like, I'm going to read less next year. And in 2025, I did read less. I read 123 books last year, and that felt pretty good. But honestly, kind of want to read less again this year. I would like to be slowing down with my reading. I would like to be quitting books more often if I'm not really enjoying them. And so once again, I have set my reading goal at 100 books. And I will consider it a great success if I don't even hit that goal. That would actually be great. I kind of think I have to hold myself back because I tend to just speed read or binge books. And I kind of want to slow down, which means I need to read fewer books to be more successful in that goal. So that is my mundane thing for my 2026 reading, keeping my goal at 100 books. The different thing that I'm doing this year is that I am no longer star rating books for myself or in public. I feel like over the past few years, I've given every book I read a star rating. And when I looked back through, those ratings meant almost nothing to me. Like, I could not tell you now the difference between a 2-star book and a 4-star book if I read it back in 2023. And it felt a little arbitrary. It felt very of the moment. And I decided that I didn't want to do it anymore. There's also another reason I decided that, which is that now that I am publishing my own books again, now that I've stepped back into that role as an author, I just don't want to be out there in the space that I'm working in, like giving other people who could be my peers mediocre or poor reviews. It feels complicated. To use a horrible, profane metaphor, I don't want to shit where I eat. And I think that that means not leaving reviews on public platforms anymore. But that's not the only reason, because I've also stopped doing this with movies and I will never make films. I just think that if I have a real thought after I finish a book, I want to write a review, like a thoughtful review. But I don't think it needs a star review because I never decided what the stars meant to me, and that makes them a little arbitrary. Now, the one exception to this is I will give a book a 5-star review. If I loved it, I'll put 5 stars on it, and that's a great signal to me in the future that I loved it when I read it. So in 2026, I will only be giving no starred reviews at all or 5-star reviews. And that actually doesn't even really matter on this podcast because I don't talk about star ratings here. I just talk about if I liked a book or not, what stood out to me, and who I think it might be good for. So it feels like that's more of a personal reading choice than it is anything to do with the content I make about books, but I thought I might share it. The other thing I wanted to share in this episode that's about my reading plans and also moves into the book recs is that as I was going through my 2025 reads, I was struck by how little nonfiction I'm reading. I think I read 3 nonfiction books last year. And I think that's largely because, one, I still feel a little burnout from reading nonfiction from my PhD program. I am over 5 years out now from finishing my dissertation, but still not wanting to go back to read philosophy or anything that feels like it. But also I think that because my job is podcasting, that's how I consume most of that type of nonfiction information. I'm not reading it in a book, I'm listening to it on a podcast. And that said, I would like to read some more nonfiction because nonfiction books are beautiful, because I learn a lot from them, because it feels very valuable to me. And so when I was thinking about what I wanted to do in 2026, I actually just looked back at the nonfiction books I read last year and decided that I would try to read more nonfiction and fiction on those themes. So the 3 themes that came from those books essentially were, I want to read more books about Palestine, I want to read more books about astrophysics, and I want to read more books about big tech that are specifically critical of it. So let me talk a little bit about how I'm thinking through this. And if you are not interested in those topics and you also don't care how I pick books to read, you can turn this episode off right now. Because that's all I'm going to talk about for the rest of this time. For you, I have an episode coming up soon about underrated romance authors, and you'll probably love that one if you're just here for the fun, good time, chat about some books, chat, rec, book. That'll happen again soon. But let me get a little more meta about this process here. So the first topic that I picked from last year's nonfiction reading was Palestine, because last year I read One Day Everyone Will Have Always Been Against This by Omar El-Akkad. And I thought it was such a beautiful, stark, morally vigilant read. And I liked it so much that I got it from the library, and then I read it, and then I bought it, and then I have passed that copy to a few people in my life who I thought could use to read it. And from that experience, I was like, okay, I think I want to read more books on this topic, but also like written in this way that's like very clear, very to the point, and from a lived experience that I don't have. So with that in mind, I did some research and I looked for more books on Palestine. And I came up with a lot of books. Like there's so many things that I could have read. And looking at that list, I was like, this is too much. I'm not trying to turn my whole year into reading about this topic. I just want to find the next book I want to read on this topic. And I decided to prioritize books written by Palestinians because that seemed really important to read a book, written by the people it's about or written by a person it's about. And the one I selected is Perfect Victims and the Politics of Appeal by Mohammed El-Kurd. He is a Palestinian writer, poet, and organizer from Jerusalem, which is occupied Palestine. And in this book, which I have just started reading, so I can't really speak to yet, but my understanding is that it's largely about politics of appeal. And what does it mean as a Palestinian to have to be appealing to people in the West to care about you? And within the book, he sort of deconstructs the way that from these Western institutions, they often talk about Palestinian women and children because the women and children should be protected. But from his perspective, he says, what about the Palestinian men? Are they not also worthy of protection? And not just the ones who are old or disabled or unable to fight back, but what about the men who are fighting back? Why don't we want to protect them too? And so I really appreciated what I take this to be, which is a feminist critique of colonial media. And as I said, I've just started reading it, but I'm finding the prose to also be really beautiful. It is incredibly clear, but also poetic because he's also a poet. And I think that I will be, reading this book over time this year. And honestly, it just feels like sort of this way of picking books, like taking one I liked, finding one more that I think I might enjoy or get a lot from next. I think that means I'll actually finish this book and I will continue learning more about this topic. Now, after I picked that nonfiction book, I also felt a little bit like, well, what about a fiction read on this topic? Can I extend this a little bit? Would it feel good to, choose these topics I'm reading based on what I liked last year, pick another nonfiction, and then add a fiction to it? And so I have also selected a fiction book about Palestine, and that is The Coin by Yasmin Zahar. And this book follows a Palestinian woman who pursues this dream that many generations of her family have failed at, apparently. And that dream is to live and thrive in America. So she teaches at a school in New York, and then she makes this friend that I guess they start up this scheme to resell Birkin bags, which, if you don't know, are incredibly expensive handbags. And I have seen a few people rave about this book, and I have seen a few people really not enjoy this book. But the author is a Palestinian journalist who was born in Jerusalem, but I believe now lives in the US. And I just thought it'd be interesting to read her novel with this Palestinian character who lives in New York City and sort of navigates this world in such seemingly outlandish way. I think that this is meant to be an unlikable character, from what I understand. I could be wrong about that. And after reading this nonfiction book that really talks about perfect victims and what it means to be likable or unlikable when the stakes are your life, I thought that a fiction novel like this could be a different way to take that in. So that is my kind of first trio of books. I read One Day Everyone Will Have Always Been Against This last year, so I want to read Perfect Victims or The Politics of Appeal this year, and then follow that up with Coin by Yasmin Zahar. Now, I've taken this same logic to the other two topics. So I said earlier, I wanted to read more on Palestine, astrophysics, and big tech critical books this year. So we just talked about the Palestine trio of books. Now we can talk about the physics trio or the astrophysics trio. So last year, I read 7 Brief Lessons on Physics by Carlo Rovelli. And again, I just found it really compelling. I was so intrigued by his sort of diagrams of black holes. And once we understand black holes, what is time? Once we think about time, what is space? And I'm still sitting with those realizations. I was interested in that partially because I was writing about time in my own book, Your Attention is Sacred, and also because my partner and I are working on a little fiction podcast secret project that involves time travel, maybe. Don't want to spoil it. So forget that if you're going to listen to it. But I have this sort of like now side interest in astrophysics and time. And so I read the 7 brief lessons on physics last year to start learning more. And so this year I have picked one and honestly kind of 2 nonfiction books that I want to read next on this topic. The first is The End of Everything, Astrophysically Speaking by Katie Mack. This book talks about 5 ways the universe could end based on the science of astrophysics. I guess they're called the Big Crunch, Heat Death, Vacuum Decay, the Big Rip, and the Bounce. So I think the book is meant to be kind of witty and take us through these different concepts and possibilities based on astrophysics. And then this breaks my 3 books rule, but whatever, that's arbitrary. I also learned from my friend Taylor about a book that's coming out this year on this topic called The Edge of Space-Time, Particles, Poetry, and the Cosmic Dream Boogie by Chandra Prescott Weinstein. And I definitely want to read this book. So she wrote a book called The Disordered Cosmos that is fantastic. And her new one is more explicitly about space-time from a scientific and Black feminist perspective, because the author is a Black woman and a theoretical cosmologist and particle physicist. So I cannot wait for this book. I will definitely be reading it, hopefully as soon as it comes out, which I think is in April of this year. So those are the 2 nonfiction books that I'll be reading based on my love of an astrophysics read last year. And then I didn't even have to look for the fiction book I wanted to read on this topic because it was already on my TBR, and that is The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. I read Becky Chambers' Monk Robot series the year before last, I think, and I really, really liked it. So this is her debut science fiction novel, and it has a crew of like multi-species space travelers who have this job tunneling wormholes or something like that. They're traveling across the galaxy. There's definitely a lot of conversations about time and physics and space and deep space. And so this just felt like the perfect book to read after I learned more about astrophysics. And finally, my third topic and sort of trio of reads is all about big tech, and particularly being critical of big tech, which to me means being critical of social media, AI, and these other like online search companies that I do not like very much. So last year I read Careless People by Sarah Wynne Williams, which was a memoir about her experience working at like the highest tiers of Facebook from the very early days. And wow, if you want to not like Mark Zuckerberg, if you want to not like Sheryl Sandberg, if you want to not like Facebook and Meta, you should read that book because it is pretty scathing. I agree with the reviewers who say that the author sort of lets herself off the hook a little bit too much. I think there could have perhaps been a little more self-reflection there, but it definitely made clear how harmful Facebook as a company is and how much they don't care. And that really bothered me. And then I also read the book Supremacy by Parmi Olson, which was all about AI. And it tracked the rise of OpenAI and DeepMind as these sort of like competing AI companies and like what they have become now, which reading that book did not make me think much more of those companies either. So this makes sense if you know me, because I run a podcast called Off the Grid, which is all about leaving social media and big tech behind. And my book was called Your Attention is Sacred, Except on Social Media. So I am a critic of social media in my work life and my private life. And so this is just an ongoing reading interest of mine. And so the next book I'm going to be reading on this theme is Enchitification by Cory Doctorow. I have actually started this one. I think it's a very compelling read. He has a sort of snarky tone that sometimes annoys me, but is also great because he's talking about really like brutal things that companies are doing to exploit their users and their workers. And so even with that topic, it's a pretty fast read, I have found, and I think a very worthwhile one. So I already recommend Enshittification by Cory Doctorow. And then the fiction pick I had for this topic was Dead Money by Jacob Kerr. So this is, I guess, a Silicon Valley-based mystery thriller about a problem solver for a venture capitalist. So it has a little bit of like Scandal, the show vibes to it. And this person has to solve the murder of a tech CEO to get this like company's assets back. And apparently it all culminates at Burning Man, which feels incredibly Silicon Valley to me. So this is meant to be more of just like an enjoyable mystery thriller read after I like go to the depths of the bummer that is Enshittification. But if you have any fiction recs that are set kind of in the tech world and critical of it, I would be happy to hear them. And that's it for this episode, friends. I hope you enjoyed hearing me ramble a bit more about my 2026 reading plans, which are mostly to not have plans except on these 3 topics that I'm interested in exploring and that I am taking one book at a time. That's really the goal. I find that as a former academic, I can get really into building a whole syllabus for how I'm going to read all of the important things on this topic. But instead, I'm trying to just find the next book I want to read. And then once I've read that nonfiction, read a fiction to sort of like help build the world of the nonfiction that I read. So I hope that this works for me this year. I think it's going to work a lot better than my just like list of 25 books I thought would be 5-star reads last year that I read none of. I really can't imagine I don't read all the books on this list. Like I like them enough that I've already bought almost all of them because I wanted to own them because I was so interested in it. I've also started reading 2 of them. So it feels like this should actually be more of a way to really read books I want to read for me. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, everything I mentioned here will be linked in the show notes. If you make a purchase through those links on Bookshop, I will receive a small affiliate payment, which I take as a tip and thanks for the book rec. I will be back soon with an episode on 5 underrated romance writers that I will be reading this February for Valentine's season. And until then, I guess all I have to say is cheers to your next best book.